Tales of Thorinis, Episode 7, Unfortunate Meeting. Step by step, Nick stalked his latest target, trailing along the dim, winding path with calculated patience. His mark moved leisurely, unaware of Nix's presence, a perfect setup for an ambush, and they were only meters from the ideal spot. With 2 swift steps and a powerful leap, Nix propelled himself through the air, landing silently on the back of his unsuspecting prey. Gripping tightly around the neck, Nix leaned in, voice low and sharp as a blade. "Hand over everything you've got, Deus." Deus, however, seemed more confused than fearful. With an easy chuckle, he shrugged Nix off and set him back on the ground with unexpected gentleness. "Nix, if you need something, just ask. No need for theatrics," he said, grinning with infectious enthusiasm. "And why were you all the way back there? Getting tired of my company?" Nix blinked, stunned. "Wait! Hold on! You knew! Igaya was there the whole time." "Why wouldn't I? You know I would have slowed down for you if you were lagging," Deus said, with a bemused smile. Nix shook his head, letting out a rare laugh. "Well, you're smarter than you look," he paused, then added, "By the way, have you seen Farvi? Is he back on his feet yet?" "Farvi? Oh, yeah. He's fine. In fact, he was out hunting this morning. Probably sniffing out wolves as we speak," Nix replied. "You know, Deus, we should go help him with his little hunt." A wicked grin crept onto Nix's face, his eyes glinting with mischief. Deus, ever good-natured and entirely unaware of Nix's underlying intentions, agreed wholeheartedly. "Great idea, Nix. I'd be more than happy to give him a hand. Back in the service, we even managed to tame a wolf or 2. Without further delay, the 2 set off into the forest, where the trees thickened and stretched in an unbroken green canopy as far as the eye could see. Nix, tapping into his hunting instincts, picked up Farvi's trail swiftly, crouching down to inspect a dark stain on the ground. "Look here," he called, his finger tracing the dampened leaves. "Blood." Deus's face paled. Is it Farvi's?" Nix glanced up with a smirk. "Oh, please, Deus, it's wolf's blood. He managed to draw some himself, at least," but his expression darkened as he added, "Still, something's off. Last hunt, the guy nearly died, and here he is on the prowl again. What kind of madman did we recruit into this team?" Deus let out a bark of laughter. "You're right about that, Nix. Farvi's in a league of his own." Nix nodded, but then his face twisted, and his hand shot up as he shouted, "Deus! Orc! Behind you!" Years of training kicked in for Deus. His sword flashed from its scabbard with blinding speed, the blade barely clearing before his eyes glowed an intense red, scanning the area with a sharp, mechanical precision. Somewhere within his frame, a low voice, filtered and metallic, announced,
"Survival mode engaged."
Meanwhile, Nix, already crouched with his own blade drawn and poised behind his back, knelt by a pool of blood, tapping the blade's tip into it. A faint sizzle echoed, like steam hissing off a searing hot pan. Then an almost supernatural silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of Deus's cooling systems cycling down. As he relaxed and sheathed his weapon, Deus looked back at Nix, exasperated. What was that all about? Nix couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, come on, Deus, you should have seen your face, scared stiff by a phantom orc." Then, as if to taunt him further, he broke into an exaggerated imitation of a hulking green beast, mixing growls with raspy, beastly sounds. Deus, visibly annoyed but unable to resist, cracked a reluctant grin. With a low chuckle, he joined in, both of them mimicking the creature's sounds until their laughter echoed into the deep green stillness. Focused as ever, Farvi took a silent, measured step, his gaze fixed on the edge of the cliff where his prey awaited. Just beyond the craggy outcrop stood the source of the commotion, a towering orc with a crude but brutal grace gripping a hefty blood-streaked axe in one hand and a wounded wolf in the other. Without ceremony, the orc brought the axe down in a precise, deadly arc, ending the wolf's struggle in a single blow. When he raised his head, his eyes met Farvi's, sharp with rage and dark intent, as though he'd known Farvi was watching all along, waiting for the fool to come within striking range. Each slow, purposeful step brought the orc closer, his shadow growing longer, and Farvi's instinct screamed at him to ready his weapon. His hand flew to his back, reaching desperately for his blade, only to close around air. "Damn it!" he cursed, as the cold realization washed over him. All he had was his hunting bow and a handful of arrows, barely enough to keep a shadow creature at bay. Against an orc, it was practically a death sentence. Orcs were no mere beasts. They were hardened, relentless warriors bred for battle, each one a living weapon forged in fury and blood. And now, Farvi's name might as well have been scrawled on a death list, written in scarlet by the orc's merciless gaze. Thinking quickly, Farvi knew he couldn't outpace the orc on flat ground. His only hope was to buy himself some distance. Moving with the fluid agility of a cat, he scrambled up the trunk of a nearby tree, finding refuge among its branches. From this higher vantage point, he selected an arrow, notched it, and drew back his bowstring, taking aim at the advancing orc. His heart thundered as he loosed the first arrow. It hit, sinking deep into the orc's eye with a sickening thud. With an enraged bellow that shook the air, the orc stumbled, gripping his face as blood poured from the wound. Then, driven into a frenzy, he raised his axe and began hacking at the tree, one savage strike after another. The bark flew with each shattering impact, splintering around Farvi's precarious perch as the orc's axe bit deep into the wood. The orc's furious howl filled the air, echoing through the forest like a war horn, shaking birds from their nests and silencing the usual hum of the wilderness. Each mighty blow reverberated through the tree, and Farvi clung to the branches, feeling the wood tremble beneath him as he prepared to make his next move. Deus and Nyx laughed to the point of breathlessness, Nyx doubling over as he smeared mud across his face and began staggering around, mimicking an orc's lumbering gait with exaggerated snarls. But their raucous fun was suddenly shattered by a distant blood-curdling roar that cut through the forest air, a sound unmistakably orcish in its fury. Nyx froze mid-lurch, the color draining from his face as a shiver crawled down his spine. In an instant, he was pulled back to a different time, recalling with vivid clarity the last time he had heard that kind of roar, the final, desperate fight of a friend he'd left behind on another continent. The memory tightened around him like a vice. Deus, sensing the shift in Nyx's demeanor, steadied himself, his playful grin gone as his own focus sharpened. He reached out and gave Nyx a reassuring pat on the back, his voice calm but resolute. "Come on," he said with a nod toward the direction of the sound. "Let's get moving. If that orc's on the warpath, it's only a matter of time before someone gets caught in its wake." Together, they broke into a swift stride, their light-hearted mood replaced by the focused intensity of a team on the hunt. The laughter had faded, but an unspoken resolve united them as they made their way through the forest, shadows stretching ahead as they followed the sound of the orc's furious cries. Nyx and Deus moved swiftly, their footsteps silent as they closed in on the sounds of the orc's rampage. Each brutal swing of the orc's axe rang out, reverberating through the dense forest as it tore into the tree where Farvi was trapped. Just as the trunk splintered under one final strike, Farvi made his choice. With a fierce yell, he leapt from the branch, dagger in hand, plunging the blade deep into the orc's shoulder. The orc bellowed in agony, his roar piercing the trees and sending birds scattering into the sky. The sound only fueled Deus's resolve. He felt his combat instincts kick in as he launched himself forward, a living weapon ready to clash with the monstrous orc. Nyx, quick as a shadow, vaulted onto Deus's back, then sprang from his shoulders, driving both blades into the orc's brawny arms. The blades hissed as they dug into muscle, boiling with Nyx's enchanted power. Even Deus and Favi stared for a moment, awed by the sight, but there was no time for hesitation. Favi took advantage of the orc's stunned pause, knocking 2 arrows and letting them fly at the beast's knees, each shot striking true. The orc staggered, snarling in pain, but managed to grab Nyx, flinging him like a rag doll into Deus. They both crashed to the ground, Deus's weapon skidding from his hand. Favi's heart pounded as he watched them fall, and with a determined shout, he grabbed Deus's sword from where it had landed. Dodging the powerful swings of the orc's axe, he managed to deliver a savage slash across the beast's chest, forcing it to stagger back, wounded but far from defeated. The orc's gaze darkened, its fury now directed at the fallen Deus. Favi, seeing the deadly intent, hurled the sword back to Deus with all his strength, shouting, "Deus, now!" Their team sprang into action as one, each member moving in seamless coordination. Nyx, using his agility and new shadow dancing skills, slipped into Deus's shadow and reappeared beside the orc, slicing low at the beast's knees to bring it down. Favi leapt onto the orc's back, wrapping his arms around the creature's thick neck and pressing down with all his weight to cut off its air. Rising to his full height, Deus seized his sword, the energy within him surging as he plunged the blade into the orc's torso, twisting it deeper with each pulse of power. For a moment, a quiet stillness descended as if the forest itself held its breath, but the orc's life force still burned strong. Even near death, the creature refused to fall. With a vicious strength, he crushed Favi's arm in his grip, the sickening crunch of bone echoing through the silence. He brought his boot down on Nyx, pressing the air from his lungs as he forced Deus's sword deeper into his own chest, muttering in his guttural ancient tongue. The orc's wild gaze locked onto Deus, its hypnotic, terrible power, rooting him in place. Nyx and Favi, seeing Deus trapped by the orc's deadly stare, fought with renewed fury to free him. Nyx drove his dagger relentlessly into every inch of orc flesh he could reach, while Favi, wincing from the pain of his shattered arm, wrapped his bowstring around the orc's neck and pulled with desperate strength. The wood groaned under the strain as the string dug deep into the orc's throat, strangling his last breath. At last, with one final rasping gasp, the orc loosened his iron grip on Deus, collapsing to the forest floor, lifeless. As the tension broke, Nyx and Favi cried out in victory, their voices filling the clearing. But when they turned to Deus, their cheers faltered. Deus knelt motionless, his head slumped forward, his armor dented and cracked from the brutal encounter. A soft, broken voice emanated from within his chest, faint and mechanical, repeating lines of code like a lullaby fading into silence. Nyx and Favi exchanged worried glances, then approached their fallen friend cautiously. As they drew closer, the robotic murmur grew fainter, and Deus's lights dimmed, his once burning red eyes now dull embers.